They said it would be the dawn of a new era.
In the Battle of Iraq, the United States and our allies have prevailed.
But in reality, the war had only just begun. And over a decade later,
we will degrade and ultimately destroy ISIL.
It looks as though history is repeating itself. But who's to blame for the current violence? And can the Iraqi state survive?
I'm Mehdi Hasan, and I've come here to the Oxford Union to go head-to-head with Mowaffak al-Rubaie, who was Iraq's national security advisor and a close ally of former Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki. I'll challenge him on his record in government and on whether his policies helped contribute to the rise of ISIL. We'll also try and tackle the controversial Sunni-Shia divide.
Tonight, I'll also be joined by Dr. Abbas al-Tikiriti, a British-Iraqi commentator and critic of the government, Professor George Joffe, Senior Fellow in International Studies at Cambridge University, and Dr. Abbas al-Hussaini, a close ally of the new Iraqi Prime Minister.
Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together for Mowaffak al-Rubaie.
An opponent of Saddam Hussein, he backed the US invasion in 2003 and led the dictator to the gallows.
Thank you for coming. Mowaffak al-Rubaie, the world has been shocked by ISIL, or the self-styled Islamic State, and its horrific atrocities, beheadings, rapes, sectarian massacres, genocidal threats. Does the Iraqi government have a plan to defeat them, or are you just waiting for outside powers to swoop in with airstrikes to save you from them?
This is a huge challenge, Mehdi. Now, it's not only Iraqi problem, this ISIS. It's a regional problem, it's an international problem. We need the international alliance to help us. We definitely need airstrikes, to intensify the airstrike now. We need speeding up the process of delivery of F-16. We also need the Apaches to be delivered quickly. We also need increasing the intelligence capacity and abilities of Iraq.
Do you need Western boots on the ground? Is that what you want to see? A return of US and UK?
Not. Number one, we don't need the boots on the ground because we have 1 million men under arm.
The Iraqi armed forces.
Iraqi armed forces. And also, no country has offered us any boots on the ground.
You talk about Iraqi armed forces. Are these the same Iraqi armed forces who in June this year, after billions of dollars being spent on them by the West, 2 divisions, a total of 30,000 soldiers, fled in the face of just 800 ISIL fighters, literally dropped their weapons, changed their clothes and ran away?
Well, this is oversimplification. The Iraqi security forces suffer from so many ills now. Number one is corruption. Number two is nepotism, cronyism,
and
hold on. Let me finish, so that I preempt your question. I know what you are going to ask.
Okay. Mind reader.
Number three is political and sectarian influence within the Iraqi security forces. So there are so many things we need to address. And we found out
given you're being so blunt and honest about the problems in the Iraqi armed forces now, do you regret, are you a little bit embarrassed saying in January on CNN that Iraqi security forces will prevail? We have the best counter-terrorist forces in the region. They ran away.
Well, there was a trick used against them, and it was a media campaign, which basically to demoralize them. And that was
campaign by ISIL.
Well, by ISIS, because they are very, very good in media and in the social media.
Yes, they are. On the subject of boots on the ground, you've also said in the past that you won't, quote, accept any foreign boots on the ground from the regional countries. But that's not true, because Iranian troops are on the ground in Iraq, aren't they? You have no problem with Iranian troops coming in to fight alongside Iraq.
It took the United States government 2 months to respond with abysmal airstrikes against ISIS in the north, and 3 months in the south. Now, it took the Iranian only a day. They sent a planner and they send a helm.
They have defended
Baghdad.
And you're okay with that, those foreign troops coming in? You're fine with those particular troops?
No, we're not talking about troops.
Okay, the Quds Force, the Revolutionary Guards.
No, there are no Quds Force boots on the ground in Iraq. So there are planners.
So General Qasem Soleimani, who was seen fighting against ISIS in Iraq, that was a fake picture that came out. He wasn't really there.
This is you call boots on the ground?
Well, he has boots and he's the commander of an Iranian armed force.
This guy is trying to help us and other planners from Iran.
I'm not questioning whether he's trying to help you or not. Well, clearly, Iran is trying to help the Iraqi government in this particular fight. I'm saying you have no issue with those boots.
We have 2,000 Americans on the ground.
Fine, so you're welcoming
2,000 Americans.
So have you switched your position from a few moments ago where you said, I don't want outsiders, I've got a big 1 million strong Iraqi army?
No, we are talking, see, we have two different things.
Fine. The fight against ISIL, as you said earlier, is not just about Iraq, it's about other countries in the region. It's also about Syria, of course, hence the name. You said earlier this year that the US should, quote, engage with Assad to defeat al-Qaeda in Syria, to defeat ISIS in Syria. Some might say that's a bit of a double standard on your part. You spent your entire life calling for action against brutal dictator Saddam Hussein, and yet you now want people to engage with brutal dictator Bashar al-Assad. How does that work?
Well, help me in understanding this. The United States government is helping Iraq to defeat ISIS in Iraq, and is helping ISIS in Syria to defeat Assad. They have to synchronize their policy. Now, we, the Iraqis, have suffered by Assad regime, but now we're talking about the devil you know better than the devil you don't know.
When you were living in London as an exile opposing Saddam Hussein, if a British government official had said to you, better the devil we know than the one we don't, our bigger priority is fighting Iran or the Soviet Union or whatever it was, you would have been outraged. And you're now saying the same thing.
No.
How do you think Assad's victims feel when they hear you say that? Better the devil we know.
I honestly sympathize with Assad victims, and I understand where they come from. But I think this is a fight for a later date. Now, I have one enemy,
even if it means
ISIS.
to use your quote, doing a deal with the devil you know. Even if it means doing a deal with the devil you know.
I honestly believe that United States of America are going to have a deal with Assad on a temporary basis.
Okay, let's go to our panel. Anas al-Tikiriti is a British-Iraqi analyst with links to the Iraqi Islamic Party. Anas, you were also prominent, I remember, in the Stop the War coalition back in 2003 here in the UK. Surely you would accept, even as someone associated with the British anti-war movement, that the only realistic, practical way to tackle a group like ISIL is with military force, at least in the short term. They're not the kind of group you can do deals with, diplomacy with, sanctions, negotiations. There's no other option.
On the contrary, it's quite foolish to suggest that you defeat ideas through bullets and missiles. What you do, you actually disseminate the idea. You recruit for the idea, simply because you're fighting, if you claim to be doing that, you're fighting an idea that's ultimate goal is to die. So how do you defeat it? The ideological war, the war of ideas, is the way to suck out the oxygen, to exterminate this group. You need to go to those on the fringes of buying into the idea and negotiating with them.
I think a lot of people listening will agree with you.
Waging a war is exactly what ISIS wants.
But if you're in a Kurdish town about to be overrun by ISIL, talking about a war of ideas is great and abstract. It doesn't help you in the here and now, does it?
No, I agree. I agree that you need to do something about it. However, unfortunately, what we're doing, Mehdi, we're continuing this cycle. ISIS isn't the start of the problems in Iraq. Before ISIS, if you recall, we were talking about al-Qaeda. So after ISIS, we are also going to end up with this perpetual cycle of new ideas coming out because we have a failed state. We have a failed context.
I honestly believe, I agree with Anas. The ideology is in the back street of Saudi Arabia. The theology is in the alleyways of Saudi Arabia. That is the largest manufacturing plant of jihadists in the world. They're spreading all over the world, ladies and gentlemen. You need to fight to face this. You need to confront this. Otherwise, these people are going to disrupt the whole world.
You've made your point. We will come back and explore these points in a moment. Let's go to the rest of our panel. Abbas al-Hussaini is former chairman of the Iraqi Association of Academics, a friend and ally of the new Iraqi Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi. In recent weeks, we've had reports of Syrian-style barrel bombs being dropped on civilian populations in northern Iraq by the Iraqi Air Force. Surely that will help ISIL recruit new members.
I really believe to use force against ISIS is essential. You have to fight force by force.
Fine.
Second thing, if the American really serious Why they really don't put pressure on Qatar and Saudi Arabia to really cut their support? Otherwise, it's a joke.
Professor George Joffe is a senior fellow at Cambridge University Centre of International Studies, an expert on the Middle East and North Africa. Professor Joffe, was it wise of Western leaders like Barack Obama and David Cameron here in the UK to talk of not just defeating ISIS, but destroying it? That's the kind of rhetoric we heard in 2001 about the Taliban and al-Qaeda, and they're still around.
Well, yes, indeed. The simple fact is that destroying movements like this is extremely difficult, and you do have to attack the ideas that run behind them, but you also have to have an effective military force to confront them. And the fact is, at the moment, the Iraqi army is not an effective military force. Most of the fighting is being done by Shia militias, not by the army itself. It seems to me that it's going to be extremely difficult to be able to guarantee destroying ISIS in any meaningful sense.
Professor, when you have an existential threat and ISIS is storming and want to occupy Baghdad, you use anything, everything, whether you call it militias or you use barrel bomb.
Even if they're killing civilians, even if they're killing children.
The collateral
How does that make you better than the terrorists?
You need to limit your collateral damages in the war. But when you are faced with the existential threat, then you're either be or not to be.
Mowaffak, when you indiscriminately
now we have
attack,
stopped. Prime Minister Abadi has, the first thing he has done has stopped the barrel, well, this indiscriminate...
which you seem to support.
No, not at all.
You just said any means possible 2 seconds ago.
No.
Fine. Many observers would argue, including people like former US Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, that the political and security crisis in Iraq today is partly down to the sectarian policies of former Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki, your former boss. In many ways, he repressed Iraq's Sunni community, especially in the north of the country, which made ISIL's rise to power all that much easier.
There is a very clear distinction between first government of Maliki and second Maliki government. The first Maliki government was not sectarian. Policies were reversed in the second Maliki government.
But the
and
same,
I agree with you.
The same Maliki,
by the
right?
way, by the way, I left government summer 2009.
You left government in summer 2009, and what did you do from 2010 to 2014?
I was trying to influence from the back...
What was your job description?
Well, private advisor, friends to the Prime Minister and to the government.
So you're still there at the heart of it?
No, well, but I do not have...
I left government and became a private advisor to the same person.
No, but I don't have any influence on the policies. I was trying to... You don't... See, from the Western mentality, you don't understand this.
I don't understand. You can tell us what it means to be an advisor who doesn't get listened to. So why did you stay on for 4 years?
Because this is my new order in Iraq. I defend the new order. I don't defend a particular prime minister. I don't defend a particular government.
Let's look at the new order. The charge sheet against the Iraqi government in Baghdad today, dominated by Iraq Shias for demographic reasons, is that they alienated Iraq's Sunni minority in 3 very specific ways. I want to put these 3 charges to you, and you respond. The first is that the Iraqi tribes who formed the awakening movement, the Sahwa movement, in 2006-07, Maliki government won. They helped drive al-Qaeda out of Iraq, I think you would admit. When the Americans left, they were then supposed to be funded by the Iraqi government and integrated into Iraq's armed forces. In fact, your government that you were part of, Maliki Government 1, betrayed those tribes, didn't fund them, and in many cases, shut them down,
That is totally untrue, and it's not factual.
Really?
Well, you got your facts wrong, young man. Yes, honestly.
When the current finance minister of Iraq, former foreign minister of Iraq, Hoshia Zebari, says Maliki was suspicious of the tribes, he wanted to disband this force. He created a bad feeling. So maybe you have your facts wrong.
Not really, no. The Sahwa I brought from al-Qaeda recruits, and we recruited them into the Iraqi security forces as the sons of Iraq. Now, we continued paying them until this day. The second Maliki government, unfortunately, they have reversed most of the policies of Maliki 1. And this is, I agree, it alienated the Sunni tribes, it alienated young people in Sunnis, and also alienated
through this kind of Maliki 1, Maliki 2 device, you seem to want to have your cake and eat it. On the one hand, you say they're paid until today, your facts are wrong. On the other hand, we alienated the tribes, we got things wrong. You need to pick one argument.
No. You need to look at the detail of it.
Fine. The second charge against the Iraqi government that you were National Security Advisor of is that it unleashed pretty violent and savage so-called death squads against Sunni communities back in 06, 07, especially in Baghdad, where hundreds of Sunni corpses started turning up with drill holes in their bodies, bound and gagged. Even today, according to an October 2014 report by Amnesty International, the Iraqi government is, quote, largely responsible for the serious human rights abuses, including war crimes committed by Shia militias that it is armed and backed. That is state-sponsored sectarian violence that you were involved in.
This is not true, and I'll tell you what happened exactly. Baghdad has gone through a very difficult time of every day 6 car bombs against the Shia, and we've been calling, don't respond in a sectarian way. Unfortunately, after the bomb, after the explosion of the 2 mosques in Samarra, things went out of control.
Human Rights Watch in 2007 produced a report in which they said it's not clear whether the ministry, Interior Ministry, controls the militias or the militias control the ministry. Either way, they're responsible for some of the worst abuses in Iraq today. This was not spontaneous. This was state-sponsored.
I cannot deny that. I can tell you that some parts, some formation, and some units of the Iraqi security forces were involved in human rights violation. I have to admit that.
Why didn't you stop them? You were the National Security Advisor.
But advisor.
So you had no power?
Not director. Advisor.
Okay.
Thank you.
So you had no power to stop them?
Well, no. You basically, as an advisor, as a national security advisor, you put the pros and cons and you give the recommendation.
And the Prime Minister ignored you? Maliki ignored you?
Well, the Prime Minister is a commander-in-chief. He is in charge of the military and the whole country.
So those killings, those people with drill holes in them, it's on Maliki.
When Maliki sits on this chair, you can ask him this question.
Well, I'm asking you, you were his advisor. I'm just wondering what your opinion is.
I gave you my opinion.
Okay. The third charge is that Sunnis in Iraq, under your governments, have been disproportionately targeted by Iraq's anti-terror laws. Hundreds, thousands detained without charge, rounded up, tortured. The former Sunni Deputy Prime Minister of Iraq said no Sunni was exempt. Maliki and his militias could arrest anyone.
Maliki was forced to do this.
Forced by who?
If you have 6 car bombs in the street of Baghdad, coming from this village, what do you do? What do you do?
You tell me, what do you do? Go in and burn down the village?
No.
That's what's happening in some parts of Iraq today?
No, that is not true. We're talking about 2010. See, can you see the mixing in dates?
Okay.
So you need to get your dates right.
So I got my dates wrong in terms of when you were being sectarian.
See, the sectarian, both sides of the divide.
Definitely, both sides have been sectarian. We all agree.
Both sides being, whether who is to be blamed more.
It's not about who's to be blamed more. It's about the fact that you were in the Iraqi government, which you have now admitted behaved in a sectarian manner. Would you agree then with Amnesty International, who've called on the Prime Minister, the new Prime Minister of Iraq, to disband these militias, which are pushing these sectarian policies that you yourself admit they're doing?
Absolutely not. We are incorporating them into one formation, into one National Guards.
Okay, you made your point very strongly. Let's go to our panel. Anas, you're of Iraqi Sunni heritage. Isn't it fair to say that whatever the Maliki government did wrong, whatever the Shia political parties, militias, committees did wrong in Iraq, many observers have said in recent months that Iraq Sunnis never really reconciled themselves to the fact that they're a minority now and the Shias are going to rule because they're the majority and it's a democracy. And even the Sunni neighboring countries have never really reconciled themselves to the fact that Iraq is now a Shia majority, Shia-run country. Isn't that true?
I doubt that it is. I mean, people talk about it. They peddle that particular argument because it serves a bit of interest. But it's not true. The fact of the matter is I'm not concerned whether Nouri al-Maliki or al-Abadi or anyone else is a Sunni or a Shia. What I'm concerned about is, are they good politicians? And unfortunately, Dr. al-Rubaie, notwithstanding my utmost respect for you, you might have been for many years a national security advisor, but you have been, one way or another, part of an establishment that has presided for 12 years over making Iraq one of the most failed states in the entire world, whether on the level of corruption, politically, security-wise, militarily. Baghdad now, according to the Mercer Index, is the worst city in the world, bar none, to live in. That is something that's happened under your watch, Dr. Rubaie. For you to totally absolve the establishment from any responsibility and to direct it towards people's grievances and people's tendencies and people's reactions to this and that, I'm sorry to say, that is a sign of a failed political establishment and a failed political narrative. The fact is, Iraq is in a miserable state and Iraqis are in a miserable state. You are part of the establishment that created this.
Okay. I think what we have inherited from the old regime is below zero. Also, the American occupation were given by Geneva Convention the right to rule the countries in security, in politics, and in economy. We were not in the driving seat for 9 years. We were a passenger.
You accepted those terms when you invited the Americans to come and topple Saddam Hussein. You accepted those terms.
Abbas, do you want to respond to what Anas was saying about the failed state and the role of the Iraqi political establishment?
No, I'm afraid Anas is a friend of mine, but I disagree with him entirely. No government in the world can really sustain the pressure from actually 3 countries around it, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Turkey. As well as you have ministers within the government of Iraq to really have double face. They are with the government and in the evening against the government. This is very important. Maliki could not rule because the minister tell him, I'm sharing power with you. You are not telling me what to do.
Let me bring in George Joffe, who I'm going to guess is neither Shia nor Sunni, and ask him.
That's correct.
How sectarian a government do you think Iraq's political establishment ran in recent years? We're hearing all sorts of claims and counterclaims. Where do you stand on this debate?
Well, my impression is that the government in Iraq became increasingly sectarian after 2006. And I say that because many of the assassinations in Baghdad were related to Shia militias operating out of the Interior Ministry. From the discussion I've heard, I'm struck by 2 things. One, the way in which positions originally taken are then adjusted. So we were told that the Iraqi army was powerful, capable of taking back control of Iraq. Then we learned that in fact it's going to be the Shia militias that do that. And the second thing is that in answer to a question that you asked as to whether Iraq was a failed state, the answer was vehemently no, but then the description demonstrated that's precisely what it is. Okay. So it seems to me that sectarianism and the failed state go together.
No, I disagree with that. I agree there are nepotism, there are cronyism, there are sectarian policy. I agree with that. And there are some corruptions. There is no doubt about it. I cannot deny that. But whether this is failed state, no.
Okay.
This is dysfunctional state, no.
Given how fractured Iraq's become, Shia, Sunni, Kurd, Assyrian, Christian, Yazidi, etc., there are some who say there's no other option. Inevitably, Iraq will divide into 3 separate states. What do you say to them?
Iraq is a united country for 5,000 years, and we will prevail, and you will see a united, secure, prosperous Iraq in a few years' time from now.
Well, on that note, we're going to take a break now. In part 2, we're going to be talking about the legacy of the Iraq invasion of 2003, about Saddam Hussein, and we're also going to be hearing from our very patient audience here in the Oxford Union. Join us after the break for Head to Head. Welcome back to Head on Al Jazeera English. My guest today is Dr. Mowaffak al-Rubaie, former National Security Advisor in the Iraqi government, now a Member of Parliament in Baghdad. Mowaffak, it's been more than a decade since the invasion of Iraq. Saddam Hussein has gone from power, good news. But having said that, the truth is that there weren't any weapons of mass destruction. There was a massive insurgency and an almost civil war. Millions of Iraqis were made refugees, and depending on which study you believe, between 150,000 and 1 million Iraqis have died since 2003. The invasion of Iraq was a complete disaster, a mistake, if not a crime.
The only things the invasion of Iraq has produced good is the overthrow of Saddam Hussein. This is one of the most brutal ruthless regime on earth, and has massacred Kurds, Sunni, Shia, mass graves in the south, chemical weapons in the north, Halab. He killed 5,000 Kurds in 6 minutes, and just under 500,000 Shia.
But the war to topple him produced hundreds of thousands of dead also.
Well, see, the road to democracy, to freedom, is difficult. You need to pay for it. And we've paid heavily in blood, in treasure, in sweat, and in tears. And we're still paying for our freedom, because ISIS is a product of sectarian polarization in the region, and it's do you know the ISIS leader was a former Ba'athist? Do you know his 2 deputies are senior intelligence officers in Saddam's intelligence agency? So that's what we have inherited from the.
It wasn't all inheritance. There were actually acts committed by US forces, British forces, Iraqi forces as a result of that war, in which people lost their lives, their homes, their livelihoods.
Mehdi, we Iraqis and the Americans have committed hundreds of strategic, tactical, operational mistakes on the political, on economic, and in security. But was it worth it? Absolutely. And if I pay my life, if I give my life for the freedom and democracy, for democracy and freedom of this country, I will. And I have given heavily
all
for
Iraqis
this.
agree with you in that, of course.
Well, I respect all anyone who differs with me.
You said in 2013 about the Iraq invasion, if we had to do it again, we'd do it exactly the same way. So just to be clear, without a UN resolution, without an international coalition, without enough troops, without proper planning, you'd do it the same way.
Without planning for post-occupation, I will not do it. But I will do it exactly the same way, because it's well worth it to remove this dictator from the face of earth. And we were very happy with it. Now, what happened after the occupation, that's a different matter.
Were you
completely different
when you say
matter.
different matter,
now,
you were involved in that, though, weren't you?
The American did not prepare for anything before. Because I'm sorry to say, they're short-sighted. They don't have a good plan.
You're not going to get me defending the Americans on Iraq, I can assure you, but you were advising them in 2002. You were meeting US officials. Why didn't you tell them what to do? Why didn't you warn them there'd be an insurgency?
They did not listen to our advice. We told them that from the day...
The Americans didn't listen to you.
They did not.
How many people listened to you?
No, they did not listen to us. They did not listen to us because they left the country post 9th of April 2003 for more than 3 months.
Mowaffak.
Totally in total vacuum.
Did you warn them there would be an insurgency, or did you say you'll be welcomed as liberators?
Nobody has
people will cheer.
Insurgency. Nobody.
You said no one ever saw the insurgency coming. We have on our panel here tonight George Joffe from Cambridge University. In November 2002, you went to see Tony Blair to talk about the aftermath of Iraq. What did you say to Tony Blair?
Yes, indeed, I did. I went there with 5 other people, 3 of them people who were experts on Iraq, and the others who were strategic experts too. And we informed the Prime Minister that after the invasion, unless he was extremely careful, there would be an insurgency. And we explained to him in detail why. I'm afraid our advice was simply ignored. Mr. Blair had a very simple view of the problems that Iraq faced. For him, the removal of Saddam Hussein alone would resolve all the problems. And that's a view that was identical to that of the Bush administration.
And is it identical to Mowaffak al-Rubaie? Did you believe that just toppling Saddam would be fine? Or did you not? You're pretty much admitting you didn't tell the Americans there would be this chaos.
Yeah, something I have not mentioned in my presentation anywhere. In 2002, we met the Americans and the Bush representative, Khalilzad, in Salahuddin, which was under the Kurds. And we told him, until and unless we form a government from day one, after the removal of Saddam Hussein, there's going to be a problem in this country. It will explode. Once you remove Saddam Hussein, the 3 community will aspire for their own identity. Now, the Americans ignored our advice. They did not listen to us, and they went their own way.
Okay, let me bring in Anas al-Tikiriti. Anas, your family suffered at the hands of the Saddam Hussein regime. You opposed the Iraq invasion. Many people would say at the end of the day, as Mowaffak has argued, despite all that's happened since, despite all the problems, getting rid of Saddam Hussein, that vicious tyrant, was worth it. He would still be around otherwise. What do you say to that?
I insisted then and I insist now. Any removal of any dictatorial, autocratic regime has to be done at the hands of the people and the people alone. Any foreign intervention in the way that came in Iraq will create the Iraq that we have today. We never had, and Mowaffak al-Rubaie will acknowledge this and accept this, before the removal of Saddam, despite the gruesome nature of the regime, we never had one suicide bomber. We never had one terrorist. We never spoke of sectarianism inside Iraq. Now, Iraq is the bedrock of terrorism around the world. The timing is uncanny. It's because of the invasion, it's because of the occupation that Dr. Rubaie was part and parcel of.
Abbas.
The point is, you see, you have to look whether Iraqi people were able to get rid of the dictator. They wouldn't. This dictatorship was such brutal, such actually strong. It demoralized, it destroyed any opposition in Iraq. And if with that really the international or actually foreign force, we still would have actually Saddam Hussein still ruling till now. The point is the bad management of the American. The American actually divide the country to sectarianism by creating actually the governing council on sectarian element of Shia and Sunni and Kurds. That was wrong.
Let me bring in George Joffe.
It's simply the case that the problems that Iraq faces today were created right at the beginning of the occupation. They were created by the Provisional Coalition Authority when it decided overnight in its first two orders to dissolve the Ba'ath Party and to dissolve the Iraqi army.
Just for yes or no, do you think the US and its allies institutionalized sectarianism in the Iraqi political system, as Abbas suggests?
I'm afraid to say I do. Okay. It seems to me that that was the fundamental flaw that created the basis for the current situation today. Okay. But that does not excuse the current government of Iraq or its predecessors.
No, it doesn't. We've talked a lot about Saddam Hussein. You were tortured by his regime before you came to the UK as an exile. You were sentenced to death in absentia. You lived most of your life in exile and after that. Years later, you found yourself as National Security Advisor overseeing his execution. You personally led him to the gallows. That very controversial execution, there were claims of sectarian taunting. There was all those secretly filmed camera phone filming of the event. It was a pretty horrific event. Am I right in saying that afterwards and since then, you kept in your office a bust of Saddam's head with the actual execution rope tied around it?
Absolutely. Yes.
You don't think that's a little bit distasteful?
No. No.
The actual rope from his neck is in your office on the statue.
I wanted to remind each and everyone that this is the fate of anyone in future of Iraq who become dictator and terrorize his people. So this is a lesson for us. Iraqis should not go back to dictatorship, should not go back to exclusion of any community. I have never felt settling scores when we pulled the trigger on Saddam Hussein in that gallows. There was no unjust being done in that chamber. There was no unjust. Now there are some people who are the executioners from the Ministry of Justice who were shouting, "Long live that" and "down with this." But this is a spontaneous reaction.
Fine. Mowaffak, let's bring in our audience. Gentleman here, yes, you want to wait for the microphone to come to you?
I'm Reba Fatah, and actually I'm an Iraqi Kurd. I think we all agree that there is a deep security vacuum in Iraq. And this security vacuum, to my mind, is a power vacuum. It means there's some fault in the authorities, in the government, in the state. But it seems to me no one takes that responsibility. And my question to Dr. Rubaie is that whether he agrees this security vacuum comes from ISIS. Is this due to failure of the Iraqi government to bring everybody integrated into the power?
There are some illnesses, and we identified this earlier on, January 2012. And we're working on them. True, they have failed miserably in the north of the country, but we are working on it.
Gentleman here in the green jumper in the third row. Wait for the microphone to come to you.
My name is Mehdi Hasan. I'm an Assyrian writer. Dr. al-Rubaie, Given the failure of both the Iraqi army and the Peshmerga forces in protecting the Assyrians, Yazidis, and other peoples of Nineveh, do you support the creation of locally derived divisions of the Iraqi army comprised of these peoples to defend their communities and ancestral homelands?
I support the recruit from each and every province, what I call regional guards, and these will be amalgamated into one force called National Guards, and this is the way to unify the country.
Okay. Gentleman right at the back there. Yes, you. Do you want to stand up? Yep.
Good evening. Earlier this year, Prime Minister Tony Blair, ex-Prime Minister Tony Blair said that it wasn't the Iraqi invasion in 2003 that caused the security situation in Iraq with ISIL at the moment, but actually the failure of the West to intervene in Syria. Do you agree or not agree with that? And what do you think the effect is of the security situation in Syria on the battle with ISIL in your country?
At the beginning of the invasion in 2003, the Syrians got frightened. The Syrian government got frightened. And they started to promote the penetration and the infiltration of the jihadists coming from North Africa, from Saudi, from GCC country into Iraq. And they have managed to kill thousands, tens of thousands of Iraqis. Now, that is one thing. But when the Syrian revolution started, I think the West missed a golden opportunity in the first few weeks.
Do you regret the Iraqi government's tacit support for Assad, who has so much blood on his hands? When Arab League voted to suspend Syria's membership, only 4 countries refused to vote for that. Iraq was one of them. Do you regret that?
We did not refuse. We said we did not vote. We did not vote. We
that's a principled stand.
No, we suspend.
You didn't take a stand against the killings that were going on in Syria as a result of the Assad government?
We believed then that isolating this horrible regime, if you like, will make it even worse for the Syrian people.
Lady behind you here is waiting.
Muslim, Shia and Sunnis have been living together peacefully for centuries. But increasingly we are hearing about this historic Sunni-Shia animosity. In your view, is this idea of Sunni-Shia animosity merely a myth? Or if that is so, who has constructed that myth and who's now the main beneficiary of sectarian violence between Sunni and Shias, not only in Iraq, but in the Middle East region?
Excellent question. There are some confessional differences between Shia and Sunnis, but they stem from the same religion. Now, if you want to politicize the confession, then that's a problem. That's a sectarian. And who is benefiting? Israel. There is no shadow of doubt in my mind. 10 years ago, you listened to the Arab world, to the Arab media, and it's all Arab versus Israelis, Arab versus Israelis. Now, can you see what is the Middle East problem is? Now, convert from Israelis versus Arabs to Shia and Sunnis.
You've made a pretty, hold on, Mowaffak, you made a pretty dramatic, provocative claim there. George Joffe is shaking his head there. Do you want to come back in briefly and respond?
The simple fact is that I seem to recall that in 1993, the Arab world generally agreed to enter into negotiations with Israel to find a solution to the problem of the Arab-Israeli conflict. So it's a bit difficult to argue that that dominated the Arab media, because it didn't. Many other issues did, and amongst them the issue of Iraq, the Iran-Iraq war, and other related incidents. So I don't think that's true.
Gentleman there in the third row there with the tie.
If Islamic State is defeated as you would want, it seems at least possible that the Kurdish Peshmerga will retake those disputed territories that they controlled back in June, July, after the flight of the Iraqi army. What do you think the Iraqi army would do should that happen, the Iraqi army and the Shia militias? And beyond that, do you think the Abadi government has the will, the capacity, the desire to settle the various disputes that Baghdad has had with the Kurdistan Regional Government over territory, over energy, and over budget?
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. I honestly believe that the first part of the question was a hypothetical one, because it starts with if. So I don't answer a hypothetical question. The second part is what the Dr. Abadi government is going to do. I think he has a list of priorities Number one is to sort out major problems with the Kurds, looking into the hydrocarbons law, and also paying salaries to the Peshmerga and incorporating this Peshmerga within the national security architect. And
okay,
so
I need to
he has priorities.
He has his priorities. There's a lady there, yes, second row.
Women are obviously very important for the future and the rebuilding of Iraq. Yet since 2003, and despite the kind of rhetoric for supporting women's rights, we've seen women's rights steadily decline in the country. To make matters worse, a Jafri law has been proposed by the government that would allow women, girls as young as 9 to be married off. It legally sanctions marital rape. It would also severely restrict the movement of women without a male companion. I would like to know what the government is doing to improve the situation of women's rights in Iraq more generally, but I would also like to ask you, Dr. Mowaffak al-Rubaie, whether you will support or reject the Jafri law that would really seriously set back women's rights back decades. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. I'm pleased to say thank you very much. And I give her a round of applause. I thank you very much for this question. I personally believe that that proposed legislation of Jafri law was rejected even by not to be discussed even by the Council of Representatives.
Gentleman here with the jacket.
If we're going to speak about ill treatment and deaths, then Shias in Iraq have suffered more deaths and have more grievances over the last 10 years or so since the regime fell, through car bombs, through suicide attacks, through killings, targeted killings. So surely the Shias should be asking for their grievances, if anybody.
Let me put that point to Anas al-Tikiriti, because we talked in part one about grievances and about some of the issues recruiting sergeants.
The fact is, and once again I return to the term that Dr. Rubaie contested, and that is the failed state. A very sure sign of a failed state is the continuous appearance of nihilistic ideologies like al-Qaeda, like ISIS, and in the future maybe something else. A sure sign also is the fact that its own communities who have been living side by side for centuries, not 5,000 years by the way, but for centuries, come at a stage whereby, well, maybe 100 have died from you, but 105 have died from me, so I have more of a grievance. The mere question is problematic, and it's a sure sign that the conditions that we have in Iraq and the state that we have in Iraq is something which is unacceptable to every single Iraqi, regardless of faith, creed, ethnicity, or background.
Okay, I'm going to take a question from this lady here, and then I'm going to go back to the back of the hall. Do you want to wait for the microphone to come to you?
Hello. A lot of people are talking about dividing Iraq along ethno-sectarian lines. For people like me that have one Sunni parent and one Shia parent, where would I fit in this new version of Iraq?
I can't agree more with you, because I have a Sunni mother and a Shia father. I can't divide myself. So how can I do that? I can't think even of dividing Iraq.
Okay, gentleman there in the corner has been sticking his hand up for a while now.
Can the doctor finally admit about a clandestine policy which for many years has been in pursuit in the region, which is essentially Muslim neoconservatives with a policy called USS, which is a United Shia state which encompasses Iran, Iraq and Syria. Can you finally acknowledge to the people here that that is something that's going on in the region, a dynamic which has not been touched on? And it may just very well explain how the doctor justifies the atrocities, human rights atrocities of Saddam Hussein, but actually doesn't say anything about the condemnation of Assad's atrocities.
Honestly, I have heard this, I've read about this, but I think this is an end product of the regional sectarian polarization between, well, Saudi and Iran. This Shia Sunni has been going on for the last decade, and what we have now, the ISIS trying to kill the Shia, and that's exactly the Shia are united and they are defending themselves.
The gentleman here.
Hello, my name is Arshad. My question is, can we not learn from Europe, who after the Second World War eventually formed the European Union, since we haven't had a war in Europe? Can the Arab world not do the same, including Saudi Arabia and other Muslim countries, where they work together and they fight common problem of terrorism, illiteracy, poverty, and eventually support a separate state of Palestine?
Absolutely. I think without a comprehensive, coherent policy of all Arab world, all Arab countries, and Muslim countries for that matter, to tackle this evil ideology, evil theology.
Okay, let's take this.
And
nice and short. We loved it. Second there, gentleman there. Yes, second row in the maroon shirt. Do you want to wait for the microphone to come to you?
Why do you think that Iraq hasn't had the weapons it's needed, the F-16s and the Apaches, the Apache helicopters?
This is a question for the Americans. They have not we've paid for the F-16, they have not delivered it. We paid for the Apache, they have not delivered it. We paid for a comprehensive electronic system of intelligence, reconnaissance, and surveillance. They have not delivered it.
Okay. Let's go back to the audience. Lady here has been sitting here.
Throughout this debate, you seem to have advanced the position of opportunity cost for human rights, the idea that it's okay to violate certain human rights in order to promote democracy or gain stability. So my question to you is the government committed to human rights, and if so, to what extent?
Believe me, I have worked really hard behind the scene with the human rights organization to help them, to get them to the American prisons as well as the Iraqi prisons.
And they don't have very nice words to say about the Iraqi prisons.
To see for themselves. Because, see, I'm one of the victims of Saddam Hussein. I went to his chamber of torture 3 times.
Hold on. What you went through, horrific, unacceptable. But doesn't that make it worse then, that you were then part of a government which then tortured other people?
But
doesn't that make it worse?
You try to make it better. You don't leave the bad things. You work from within, which is much more influential, much more effective.
Just before we finish, one last question from me. It's been more than a decade since the invasion of Iraq. Saddam Hussein was toppled, and yet today, all these years later, you have this group, these fanatics controlling 1/3 of the territory of your country, threatening your capital city. And I just want to ask, when you look back on that past decade or so, you look back at your own role, what's the thing you regret most? What's the one thing, with the benefit of hindsight, you think you, Mowaffak al-Rubaie, got wrong?
I honestly think that we should have pressed harder than we have with the Americans in 2002 to form an interim government of Iraqis from inside and outside, to form the government immediately after the 9th of April 2003. And that was, we left it, and after the departure of Saddam Hussein in 2003, the American left the country in total vacuum, security, economy, and the whole country is in shambles. And that was a fertile ground for terrorist organizations to grow and do this.
Thank you very much for coming from Baghdad. Thank you to our panel for their contributions today. Thank you for our audience for their contributions today. The debate will continue at home. Join us for Head to Head next week.